J'ai perdu toutes mes illusions. Je m'attends à
I've lost all my illusions.
Je m'attends à tout.
I expect anything to happen.
Plus rien me rassure.
I don't find any reassurance in anything.
Et surtout maintenant.
Especially now.
Surtout maintenant.
Especially now.
J'ai tellement peur parce que
I'm so afraid because everything is so uncertain.
Que je me dis
I keep thinking that something could suddenly happen from one day to the next, before you even have the time to realize.
Qu'on a le temps de réaliser.
Forgiveness has no meaning to me. Some things simply cannot be forgiven. I don't see why I should forgive them, and no one has ever asked me for forgiveness.
Nothing can surprise us, because we have an extremely pessimistic philosophy of humanity. I think that people are capable of both the worst and the best, and that there are two types of human beings: those who are incapable of being wild beasts, and those who have remained in a primitive state.
Gathered in cupboards, locked away in files, a whole multitude of names bear witness to the insane upheavals which shook the world in the middle of the last century. The names on these lists are often the only remaining testimony to all those destroyed lives, to thousands of destinies cut short. What memories still remain of all these human beings caught up in this madness which engulfed the world?
Et le cauchemar a commencé comme
The nightmare began like that.
Je me souviens que
I remember that we had a bench.
on était assis,
We were sitting there,
tous les
the
deux,
two of
parce
us,
que mon père c'était tout pour moi.
because my father meant everything to
On
me.
était appuyés
We
dos
were
à
sitting
dos.
back to back, and we were both
On
sobbing.
sanglotait tous les deux.
Then a sort of mania took hold. People just abandoned everything. They rushed off to catch trains. They left with tins of peas, tins of sardines, dried pasta. It was a sort of madness.
We knew the danger was there. But what could we do? We had nowhere to go. No one came up to us to say, "I can hide you." Maybe we could have done what some did and tried to get across the demarcation line. But with what money? And where would we have gone? So we stayed.
On est resté.
Et tout était interdit, il fallait pas quitter la
Everything was forbidden.
il fallait pas
You couldn't leave
sortir,
town.
il fallait pas sortir
You couldn't gather in
à
groups.
n'importe quelle heure
You
de
couldn't
la
go out in the
journée,
street at just any time of the day.
on entendait dehors
And we'd hear cries outside.
des los, schnell, schnell,
Los, schnell, schnell,
raus
raus,
et des coups de mitraillette.
and machine gun fire.
Mais tout ça, ça se passe,
But it all seemed so unreal.
ça paraît tellement quelque chose.
We didn't know if we were dreaming it or if it was reality.
La réalité. J'étais complètement paralysée. Il n'y avait que des cadavres.
I was completely paralyzed.
Il y avait juste un bébé.
There were bodies everywhere except for this
C'est
baby.
bien ce bébé.
The baby was about 18 months old and fine,
Il hurlait au milieu de ces cadavres.
and it was screaming in the middle of all the bodies.
Et il y avait plein de sang.
There was blood everywhere,
Je n'arrivais
and I
pas
just couldn't move.
à bouger mon corps. Et ce bébé, ça me hante.
That baby has haunted me until this day
Un peu coupable
because I feel guilty for not having had the strength to go and pick it up.
d'aller prendre cet enfant.
La résistance pendant toute cette
The
période.
resistance had been growing during this period, and we started killing German officers here and there, in Paris, Nantes, Bordeaux.
Moi, j'ai surtout fait
But I was mostly transporting equipment,
de toute espèce.
newspapers and sometimes weapons,
Et parfois des armes.
sticks of dynamite and stuff like that.
Des trucs comme ça.
I'd put whatever it was in the bags on my bike and deliver it here and there.
J'ai
I was a member of an armed wing.
L'application
Pétain's anti-Semitic legislation, which was passed in October 1940, gradually started to be enforced.
40 va s'appliquer progressivement. Ça n'a pas
It wasn't really the reason for my father's arrest on the 12th of December 1941,
41 parce
because he was arrested by the Germans,
par les Allemands, par
by the Gestapo.
comme otage, parmi 1000
He was taken as a hostage, as one of 1,000 preeminent Jewish citizens.
et ma mère, nous allons être pris
But my mother and I were taken on the 16th of July 1942
1942 dans le
as part of the infamous Vélodrome d'hiver roundups.
de la rafle du Veldiv.
On nous a expulsés
We were turned out of our
de
house
notre maison en même temps que les autres,
at the same time as all the Jews were,
tous les juifs, et on nous a parqués dans un
and we were all herded into one neighborhood.
ghetto A. Et
There
le
was Ghetto A and Ghetto B.
Le ghetto A, c'était des
Ghetto
jeunes
A was for the youngsters,
tout travail
fit for work,
et qui étaient utiles
those who were useful to the Third Reich
au Troisième
for their
Reich,
production
à la
needs.
production. Et le ghetto B était
In
parqué
Ghetto
des
B
gens qui n'ont pas eu le temps
were all those they hadn't had the time to
de
deport
les assassiner.
or murder yet.
Alors des familles qui ramenaient d'ailleurs
Families
ces gens-là,
brought from elsewhere
ils s'occupaient
and just
absolument
dumped
pas
there
d'eux.
with no food,
Il n'y avait pas de ravitaillement, il n'y avait rien.
nothing.
Quand on a sonné à
When the knock came on the door early in the morning of the 16th of July, I could have simply not opened it.
mais
But my mother said, "Open the door."
on avait préparé.
She'd packed some things.
Pas ce qui allait se passer.
We didn't know what was going to happen. And standing there at the door were French policemen.
Les policiers français. Et
I should point out here that it was foreign or stateless Jews they were rounding up that day.
ou apatride. C'était
There was a sort of buffer zone for the protection of French Jews.
des Israélites français.
Et ce que j'ai vu, c'était quelque chose
I saw atrocious things there, bodies in the street, children holding hands and crying as they wandered the streets.
Avec la morvonnée en pleurs, qui erraient dans les
Their
rues.
parents must have been long gone.
Personne, qu'ils avaient plus de parents.
In this closed ghetto, there was just me
Mes deux frères,
and my 2 brothers left of my family.
famille.
No one else.
Tout le monde
They'd
était
all been
déporté,
deported or killed.
assassiné.
Quand la porte s'est ouverte,
When the door opened
boucle d'or, j'ai su que c'était fini.
and I saw Goldilocks, I knew it was over.
Alors, il a mis,
He must have recognized me right away, of course,
bien évidemment, mais il m'a pas
but he didn't pick me out at that
dans
moment.
la minute.
He seemed to shrink back a bit, like a wounded animal.
Il a regardé une à une.
Then he looked at all the girls, going, no,
Je dis, c'est
no.
pourvu qu'il me
I
reconnaisse
thought,
pas.
please God, don't let him have recognized me.
Pas,
And then he finally made up his mind, pointed at me and said,
désigné, il a dit, c'est elle.
that's her.
Alors le Boche a dit,
The crowd said, oh, sorry. The Gestapo said,
le type de la Gestapo a
is that
dit,
Annick?
c'est Annick. Et
And the office supervisor said,
non, non,
no, her name isn't Annick.
Annick. Et elle a
And she
déclaré
told them my name.
Et puis ils m'ont embarqué.
They took me from there to the Gestapo headquarters, which was only just up the road on the other side.
Plus loin, dans la même rue en face. Et il y en a 2
2 others recognized me.
qui m'ont encore reconnu. On était
24 of us were arrested in all.
Ces 2-là qui
The 2 who recognized me didn't say much, and we weren't given too hard a time.
Mais vraiment, les Allemands ont été
But the Germans were up to date with all our activities.
notre
They knew
organisation,
everything.
Nos activités, ils ont été vraiment au courant de tout.
On nous a donné l'ordre de nous
We were ordered to assemble in a large square.
une grande place,
It had been the bus station.
l'ancienne place des
And we had to
autobus.
get down on our knees with our hands behind our heads.
Nous mettre à genoux avec les mains derrière la nuque. Et ils
Then they did their
procédaient à la
selection.
sélection. C'est comme ça que dans
That was how my younger brother disappeared, in that liquidation of the ghetto.
disparu. Et à côté de moi, il y avait une femme que je connaissais.
Next to me, there was a woman I knew.
Elle venait d'avoir un bébé.
She just had a
Un
baby.
bébé avait 15 jours.
The baby was only 2 weeks old.
Elle était à côté de moi.
She was sitting next to me.
Ils m'ont ordonné de se lever, d'avancer.
They told her to stand up and move forward.
Étant donné
And
qu'elle
as she had
avait
had a
bébé,
baby,
forcément, elle allait
she was
voir le
naturally
groupe.
directed to the group that we knew was the bad one.
Et rien se passait calmement. Hein. Chaque
But
personne,
nothing happened in a calm way.
qu'on lui
Each person,
indiquait son
when they
sa
were told where to
direction,
go,
un coup de cravache, un coup de botte.
got hit with a whip or got
Et
kicked.
cette femme-là, elle a trébuché.
Anyway, this woman stumbled and she dropped the baby.
Et le bébé est tombé. Et 2 soldats,
And 2 soldiers,
sûrement qu'ils étaient
I think they
libres,
must have been drunk. I don't see how they could have done this
Ils ont
otherwise.
commencé à jouer au football avec cet enfant.
Started playing football with the
Et
baby.
cette mère, elle s'est retournée.
The young mother turned round and was struck on the
Elle
head
a
with the
reçu un
whip.
coup de cravache sur la tête.
Then she was gone.
Et elle est partie.
Le 25 septembre,
On the 25th of September, when we clambered down from the cattle cars, the men and women were separated.
nous a séparés, les hommes et les femmes. Ensuite, il y avait
And there in the middle of the ramp
des camions bâchés
were covered trucks waiting.
vers lesquels on dirigeait les enfants,
They pushed the children, the old people,
les
the disabled and the crippled
handicapés,
towards
les
them.
personnes âgées.
I didn't even see my mother get in a truck.
Et ma mère dans le camion. Et nous sommes
Then we were marched off. Then we were counted.
nous sommes
Out of a convoy of 1,000 men, women and children, only 26 of us arriving at Birkenau camp were women.
au camp de Birkenau.
We didn't know what was going on. We were surprised that the trucks hadn't arrived before us. And when we asked the capo why the trucks hadn't arrived, she pointed towards the windows. We looked out of the windows and she pointed at these smoking chimneys. She explained that those who hadn't walked with us into the camp had ended up over there. She told us about the gas chambers, about the smoking crematoriums turning the sky red. So, from the evening I arrived, I knew I'd never see my mother again. But I held on to the hope of seeing my father. We spent that first night in the block because the initiation ceremonies wouldn't start until the next day. I've forgotten to mention that the day we arrived, the 25th of September 1942, was my mother's birthday. She was just 50. They undressed us, shaved us, and tattooed us. That was the speciality of Auschwitz, the tattooing. My mother said as soon as we arrived and put our bags down that we had no identities anymore, and she was right.
One day, the 24 of us found ourselves in these trucks, in buses actually, I think. Then we were transferred to a train, which took us to Fresnes, all 24 of us together. We were taken to this well-furnished room, black and red curtains everywhere, a portrait of Hitler at the end of the room, and judges in their robes and so on. It was very impressive. There were soldiers lined up along the walls. We were made to stand. Then the head judge started this long-winded speech. And the interpreter translated what the judge was saying. Anyway, the first 9, I wasn't one of them, were sentenced to death. That really hit me hard. But it made me think I wouldn't be sentenced to death too, because I wasn't an important enough member of the resistance for that. So anyway, the first 9 were sentenced to death for attacking the German army, sabotage of equipment, and so on. Then he carried on and sentenced the next 7 to death too, for assisting the enemies of Germany in their sabotage. I was one of those 7.
À Plaszow, Goethe, commandant du camp,
at Plaszow, the camp commander
s'amusait à tirer sur les gens.
Used to get his kicks from shooting people. He'd gallop up on a white horse
Avec un chien
with a Dalmatian dog, which followed the
qui
horse.
suivait le cheval. Et puis il tirait tout ce qu'il bougeait.
Then he'd shoot anyone who moved.
Et c'est comme ça, un jour, il y avait une femme.
It happened near me one day when this woman suddenly just dropped at my feet.
Et moi, je me suis retournée.
I turned round and looked at
Je
him,
le regardais.
and I could see how much he enjoyed it,
Il était épanoui.
how pleased he was with himself.
Il était content de lui. Et il avait des fantaisies comme ça.
They were his fantasies.
C'était un personnage
He was a person who Throughout all the camps I stayed in during my time as a deportee, I wouldn't say he was the most insane, because it wouldn't have been his fault if he was insane. But he was the most brutal. I don't know how he ended up like that. He loved blood. He loved barbarity. He loved killing. I read afterwards that he was a really ordinary man. It's often the most ordinary of men who, when they get some power during wartime, commit the most horrible atrocities. I've always believed that it wasn't just the Germans who were capable of things like that. We were capable of it in France too. This is proved by all the torturing we did during the Algerian War. I despair that such painful episodes aren't restricted to that period in Europe. They happen everywhere. In South America, in Africa. These crimes are committed all over the world, like in Rwanda. And it fills me with anger, with sadness, with despair, after having lived through such things. It seems insane that such things can still happen after the Second World War. But we get used to the very worst. I don't know how to explain it. It's painful, that's for sure. Deeply painful.
Personally speaking, I've never denied that there were genocides before the Nazi camps, and that there have been genocides since. I know that my comrades don't agree with the use of the term concentration camp, and that they prefer extermination camp when talking about the Nazi camps. But there have been such camps elsewhere, and in other forms, of course.
I don't hold young Germans responsible, even though I know that there's still an extreme right, that there are still Nazis in Germany. But there are Nazis in France too.
The Battle of Stalingrad would change the course of history. Within a few months, the Soviet flag would be flying over the city once more. "50,000 Russian soldiers and almost 3 times that many German troops would die in the battle. 120,000 more were taken prisoner. The defeat of the German Sixth Army shook the Third Reich to its core.
We used to hold our ears to the ground to see if the ground was trembling. That's when they started sending people to Auschwitz. We were all naked. We were afraid because we were surrounded by that smell, by the smoke. We were nervous and our teeth were chattering. We also soiled ourselves because there was no way of going to the toilet. And maybe the fear made that worse. It was hell. All the smells mixed together. One morning at dawn, we heard a noise, and we were really scared. They stopped at our cell, and we thought, this is it. The fellow read out this paper which said something about the 14 boys being shot within the hour, but that we were being sent to Germany, that the Führer, in his magnanimity, had granted us a stay of execution. We hadn't been pardoned, and our fate would depend on our attitude in Germany. So I stayed in Lübeck for 3 months, and then, at the end of those 3 months, a whole bunch of us were sent from Lübeck prison to Cottbus. And there, on the 14th of July, we said to our female guards, it's Bastille Day today, so we're not working, we're on strike. And that's just what we did. We danced, we sang La Marseillaise and so on. And then the Gestapo showed up. The female guards really came to regret that, because afterwards the Gestapo were there every day. Our luck changed then, and soon after we were sent to Ravensbrück.
They lined us up between the electrified wires and the groups of huts. We were told to strip, and then we were made to run between 2 lines of SS men, to run for our lives. I can sum up that race in the following way. We know that at the start there were about 6,000 of us, and at the end there were about 1,500. Those who didn't reach the end had been clubbed down by the rifle butts of the SS men on both sides. We ended up in some open space or other and got shouted at by the camp commander, who told us that we'd been selected to live. At the same time, we could see the thousands of our comrades who were going to die that day being thrown onto trucks. Then they were driven to the gas chambers. The screams were such that I can't remember any more of the camp commander's speech. All we could hear was the screaming of our comrades, because they knew they were going to die. They knew where they were going.
It's impossible to say what exactly it was you felt when you found yourself in the crematorium complex, with that smell, the smoke. And you were waiting. How long would it last? You didn't know. Would I collapse? I didn't know. It's impossible to explain how you feel at such a time. It's something unreal. The smell was one of death, of filth, of misery, I don't know. I was impregnated with that smell for a long, long time afterwards. I remember this one woman mumbling a prayer, and I got angry with her. Something clicked inside me, and all of a sudden this anger reinvigorated me. I thought, how can she pray? How can she think there's a God? I was outraged. I still feel outraged against religion. I'd like to be able to respect certain religions today. I know there are some decent people who have this need to believe in something. I can see how it helps them get on with their lives, but then I remember that our tormentors were all believers. They'd say to each other,
Gott mit uns.
Gott mit uns.
Dieu avec nous.
God is with us.
Sans arriver à se projeter
Without being able to
dans
picture
l'avenir,
yourself
sans
in the
croire
future,
qu'il y
without
aurait un
believing
avenir,
that there would be a
on
future,
pouvait pas
you
survivre.
couldn't survive.
Mais je le savais qu'il y avait
I knew there were political organizations in the camp,
que j'ai demandé
and I wanted to be a member of
à
one of these
adhérer à
clandestine groups.
l'organisation clandestine disons d'un parti
A French-speaking communist organization, for example.
des Françaises,
There were
il y avait
French
des
and
Belges,
Belgians
il y avait
who made up the
à
French-speaking
ce
contingent.
moment-là des Hollandaises.
There were also Dutch
C'était
people
le
in these
collectif
groups.
de langue française.
We were put into this block, Block 32, which had been there for a while, and there was a sense of solidarity already established. And this solidarity had mostly been organized by the communists. A lot of pregnant women arrived at the camp. At first, the women and their babies were killed. Later on, only the babies were killed. I don't know why, but rather than killing them on arrival, they waited for the babies to be born and then killed them both. And then later on, they only killed the babies. Then they let them both live. But the babies would die anyway. The guards' dogs were given milk, but not these babies. Anyway, we managed to steal a pair of rubber gloves from the German doctor and made teats from the fingers. The solidarity there was a complex, wide-ranging thing. But we didn't manage to save many children, even though we risked our lives to help them. Stealing the milk that was intended for the dogs was really dangerous.
The living conditions were such that your life expectancy was reduced by so many different factors. There was the lack of food, the lice, the work, the dogs, the female guards who supervised life in the camp and accompanied the work parties. Everything forced us to our deaths. We might just about survive, but not if we caught typhus. I had already seen lice under the microscope. In the camp, you could get infested with lice in no time at all. And it's lice that transmit exanthematic typhus. The trucks arrived, and that was just horrible. The children were loaded onto the trucks. They were torn out of the arms of their mothers, who tried to hold on to them like this, and we were powerless to stop it. It was horrific. We felt really ashamed afterwards for having let it happen, but that's my worst memory. The children were loaded onto these trucks, and then the trucks left. Oddly enough, the mothers screamed, but not the children. There was this dark-haired little boy who'd only just been playing with the chief female guard. He was clutching his mother round her neck. No tears, nothing. Then this guard who'd just been playing with him grabbed him by his hair and tore him from his mother, knocking the mother to the ground with a vicious blow of her club. I thought, I hope she's dead, because to wake up and find her little one gone, it was awful. That was the hardest part for me. I've never felt guilty, but I do feel a bit ashamed about that. I think that we should have tried to resist in some way, even if it meant getting massacred. We didn't, but we should have done. We were all sobbing.
The Allies landed in Normandy. The blood and tears of thousands of people, soldiers and civilians, were shed in one of history's greatest battles. Within a few months, France was liberated. For some, the war was now over. But those still in hell could not even dream of peace and freedom yet.
Et nous avons été évacués.
We were evacuated from Auschwitz,
D'Auschwitz,
the whole camp.
de tout le complexe. Au départ, ça nous
At first, we were delighted because we couldn't now be gassed, and that was what we feared most. But now we could end up getting shot if we didn't keep walking. We saw our comrades die like that. That's why we called these marches the death camp marches. Anyway, that's how I ended up at the end of January, beginning of February, at Ravensbrück camp in a tent. There was water halfway up our legs, which made us even colder. We no longer had straw mattresses, just a few planks with 4 of us sleeping on each plank. So we were still a long way from surviving or even hoping to survive. Then we were sent by train via Magdeburg to Leipzig.
We were loaded onto trains again. And we were off. Oh yes, I forgot to say. There was this girl who said to the female guard, Madame, how long are we going to be traveling? There are dead bodies among us. There are people dying. We can't take much more of this. How much longer will it go on? And the answer was, until you all die. We had no illusions left after that. When we got to Mauthausen, in the evening we were made to strip, so they could disinfect our clothes, so they said. So we were really cold all night long. It was the 12th of March and was very cold. And we saw this long convoy of men walk by, coming from what was called the Russian camp, because it had been built by Russian prisoners. In fact, it was the infirmary. And these men were like ghosts. For a start, they were naked. They either had blankets draped over them, like Muslims, or a bit of towel, like a loincloth. But they didn't seem to care that they were naked. They just walked by. It was like something out of Dante. They gassed 3,500 over that last week, not counting all the others killed here and there. But they carried out this mass extermination right at the end. It wasn't much fun, of course, and it made us worried about our own situation. We thought, being liberated won't do us much good if we're killed. And those of us who were still alive, if you can call it alive, we were more like the living dead. We're made to walk. We came to this gate with the guards on either side and us in the middle. And the people already inside this camp came up to the gate and told us, like a piece of good news, the Germans aren't allowed to come in here. There was one woman among us who took a step into the camp. turned round and spat in the face of a guard. I think we'd all have liked to do the same thing, but we were so exhausted that we didn't have the strength. We were told that we were at Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia and that we were now under the protection of the Red Cross. Then all of a sudden, we heard these cries of joy. It was a sort of frenzy. The cries were coming from the first among us to reach the trucks. Because the truck drivers were American soldiers in their uniforms. And they were black. And there certainly weren't any black men in the SS. These women were delirious with joy, and they wanted to kiss these poor black fellows who were suddenly faced with all these filthy, stinking ghosts. They must have thought, they're going to eat us. It was mad. I couldn't get close enough to try to kiss them because there were so many in front of me. Anyway, they gave us American cigarettes, and oh, the smell of those cigarettes. I don't smoke, but that smell, if ever I smell it now, it takes me right back, and there I am again, newly liberated in Mauthausen.
It was on the 23rd of April, on the banks of the Elbe, in a house where we'd gone to take shelter from the bombs, that I was liberated by the Red Army.
There were people shouting, "That's it, we're free, the Russians are coming." And some people went completely mad. I saw someone jump from an upstairs window. I don't know what these people were thinking. They must have been insane to do something like that at such a moment. Committing suicide was completely senseless.
When we came out, we saw in front of the house a baker's cart piled high with bread, and on the cart was a soldier of the Red Army, legs apart, throwing loaves of bread down at all the people gathered around the cart. That was how we got our first taste of the bread of freedom. And it was only then that the possibilities of being repatriated started to become a reality. And I'd already decided that I wasn't going to choose Germany. I chose France again.
I told everyone I'm going to France, and they looked at me like I was mad. One woman said to me, "To France? How are you going to go to France? Do you realize we're in Czechoslovakia? France is a long way away." But I wouldn't listen. All the discussions I'd had with my parents came back to me. They used to talk about France like it was the promised land. French culture, the French Revolution. My father had wanted to conduct an orchestra in Paris. He'd say it with a smile on his face, not really believing it, but still. Getting to the Lutetia Hotel in Paris wasn't much fun. We felt like we were less than human, that we were like animals. It was almost like being back in the camps. They ordered us into lines and sprayed us with DDT, I suppose. I think that's what it was, a white powder. We realized after a while that they were worried about typhus, but still, it was offensive. We were all white. Our hair was all white. It stank. It was unpleasant. It stung. We were furious. At the end of the 5th day, I was told, "Okay, you can go home now." So I got on a train. And all the other passengers had been prisoners of war. When they saw me, they asked me what I was doing there. I told them I'd been in Germany, so they called me a Kraut's tart. What were you doing in Germany then? They were very close to beating me up. It was the first time since I'd been arrested that I'd felt afraid like that. I thought, I escaped the death camps, and now this lot are going to have my guts. Then on the way from the station to home, I went to see an aunt. This aunt had once had a go at me when my mother told her I was joining the resistance. She had berated me, telling me how the Germans didn't only arrest resistance members, but also their families, their brothers, parents, cousins, everyone. And that if they were arrested, even though they'd done nothing wrong, they'd have no choice but to... That's what she told me. I now stopped off on my way home to see this aunt because she had never been in very good health. But I still remembered her warning. And now when I went in to give her a kiss, what did I see on top of the wireless set? A big blown-up photo of me, embellished with a tricolor ribbon and a bow. It cracked me up. I just couldn't stop laughing. It was so ridiculous, and quite indicative of France as a whole. All these people who'd either collaborated or been passive were suddenly full of heroism, displaying photos of their heroes adorned with tricolor. My uncle said, "They're all still alive, you know." And that just destroyed me. All still alive. He was talking about my relatives, of course, but I was thinking of all those others. I found out that my brother had died a month before the liberation. He'd just let himself die, thinking, "Franya's no longer with us. I've no reason to go on living." When we got back, the Jewish aspect was completely overlooked. People only talked about the resistance. The Jews didn't exist. They'd come back like anyone else, and there was no difference. Worse, they were poorly treated because they didn't even get a proper allowance at first. They got what was allocated to so-called politicals, which was a pittance. They weren't acknowledged, and a lot of them were foreigners. They'd come to France as refugees from Poland or wherever, and had then been rounded up in France. So now they found themselves in real difficulties. What's more, they were ashamed. Ashamed maybe of not having put up enough of a fight. Yet there were plenty of Jews in the resistance. There were plenty of resistance members among the immigrant labourers, but most people were quite passive. I don't think they could be otherwise. How's a woman with 4 children supposed to fight off the gendarmes who've come to arrest her? What's more, they were arrested by French gendarmes, not Germans, almost all of them.
This arbitrary separation of the resistance on one side and the victims of genocide on the other, when it was all part of a historical whole, I think that's a big mistake. I hope we can establish some sort of unified historical view of the massacre. I've always said, and I'll say it again, that none of us should have come back. Because it's a priority of a dictatorship to eliminate its opponents. And incidentally, scapegoats. That's already one thing. So I think things will have improved when we don't automatically say to someone who was deported, "Oh, so you're Jewish," as if only Jews were deported. That's a mistake.
For a long time, I didn't talk about the deportation, except when I was with others who'd come back, because it seemed people just weren't interested. They couldn't care less. There was no point in telling them. Then in the 80s, there were the Holocaust deniers. They were called revisionists at first and then deniers. And we started to realize that we had to do something. We knew there had been gas chambers. We knew what the concentration camps had been like. So we had to make at least as much noise as them. We had to be heard. When we started talking about it, we thought it would be a warning to the youngsters, that they'd hear about what happened to us, and it would make them think, and might influence the way they voted. We were full of such illusions. But gradually we are seeing how things are getting worse. How this change, this religious change, I'd call it, is happening. And that we're powerless against it. Our testimony has had no effect.
I really don't see today how we can glimpse any sort of hope for the future. Just the thought of these preventative and humanitarian wars we've waged recently. It's hard to understand how people can decide to go to war in order to improve things. Or to establish a democracy. It seems so obvious to me that it isn't the right way to offer humanity some sort of future. Who benefits from these wars? It's always the same. You think you're dying for your homeland, but I don't think such a thing exists anymore. Back then, they were already dying for heavy industry, for Wendel, Krupp, Thyssen. Today it's the same. It's Enron, Bush Senior, Rumsfeld. And all those who want Iraq's oil,
veulent le pétrole irakien, qui ont menti pour
they lied to take us to war.
pour faire la guerre.
People always lie in order to go to war. Hitler lied to the Germans, saying they were a master race, superior to all others. And the German people believed him.
Le peuple allemand l'a cru.